I came home for Christmas expecting warmth, family, and comfort. Instead, I found my grandfather gasping for breath in a freezing house while my parents were sipping cocktails on a luxury cruise. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I never imagined Christmas would be the moment I realized my own parents were capable of abandoning a dying man and lying to me about it. My name is Rhea. I live far away and work non-stop, but I always came home for Christmas. My parents, Lynn and Bram, told me Grandpa Walt was doing fine. They said someone checked on him every day. I trusted them. I shouldn't have. When I opened Grandpa's door, cold air hit my face. The house was silent. I found him slumped in his chair, weak and shaking. His lips were dry, and the heat was barely on. He whispered my name like he wasn't sure I was real. I called for help and stayed with him until the ambulance came. At the hospital, the doctor said if I had arrived any later, Grandpa wouldn't have survived the night. That's when I checked my phone and saw a cheerful message from my dad, sent from a cruise ship. They had left him alone to enjoy their vacation. Grandpa died a few days later. At the funeral, my parents cried loudly and talked about how much they loved him. I felt sick listening to them. While sorting Grandpa's papers, I found proof that he had warned them he was getting worse. I also learned the house wasn't fully theirs because of a clause Grandpa added long ago. Their neglect broke the agreement. I sold the house, paid Grandpa's bills, and honored his wishes. My parents lost everything they thought they owned. I didn't argue or shout. I just walked away, knowing I kept my promise to the man who never abandoned me. I'm Rhea, and my life has always been built far from my hometown. My job keeps me busy, my days are long, and most of the year passes without me stepping foot back where I grew up. Still, no matter how exhausted I was, there was one promise I never broke. I returned every December. Christmas was the only time I allowed myself to slow down and reconnect with where I came from. The person I came back for wasn't my parents. It was my grandfather, Walt. He wasn't just family to me, he was my safe place. While others chased careers, trips, or excuses, he stayed steady. He packed my lunches when I was young, waited outside school events, and answered late-night calls when I felt lost. His house always felt like home in a way no other place ever did. As I grew older and moved away, I worried about him. Age changed his body but not his kindness. Whenever I asked how he was doing, my parents brushed off my concerns. They said everything was under control. They told me he had help, that they were managing his needs, and that I didn't need to stress myself out. I wanted to believe them. Trusting your parents feels natural, almost automatic. Looking back, that trust came from habit, not proof. I ignored the small doubts that crept in during late phone calls or long pauses before answers. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, they were his children. Surely they wouldn't fail him. Walt never complained. If anything, he tried to protect me from worry. He asked about my work, my plans, and my future. He never asked for help, even when he needed it most. I mistook his silence for comfort and their words for truth. That mistake changed everything. 7 days before the holiday, I called home to confirm my travel plans. That conversation changed everything, though I didn't know it yet. My mother, Lynn, sounded calm and unbothered. Her voice carried the same tone she used whenever she wanted a topic to disappear. She spoke smoothly, as if nothing in the world needed concern. She assured me that Walt was resting well. According to her, his days passed quietly and safely. Someone, she claimed, stopped by regularly. Meals were arranged. Medication was monitored. There was nothing urgent, nothing unusual, nothing that required my presence any sooner than planned. Her confidence shut down the questions forming in my mind. She told me not to stress. She told me I was imagining problems. She reminded me how busy I already was and said I deserved peace. I let myself relax. I focused on finishing work deadlines, wrapping gifts, and booking my flight without rushing. I trusted her words because they were delivered so easily. Lies often sound softer than truth. What remained unspoken mattered more than anything she said. While she was reassuring me, suitcases were being filled. Documents were being printed. Plans were finalized without my knowledge. They weren't preparing a home for colder nights or arranging extra help. They were organizing an escape. No mention was made of flights leaving without me. No hint was given about days spent at sea. No warning that doors would be locked behind them. Silence covered their choices like a blanket, hiding what they were about to do. I replay that call often. Not for what was said, but for what was deliberately left out. In that moment, a decision had already been made. Comfort was an illusion offered to keep me distant, distracted, and unaware. By the time I boarded my plane, everything had already been set in motion. The moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air pressed against my skin, sharp and bitter, like the place had been forgotten. There was no sound, no television, no movement, not even the low hum of warmth running through the walls. It felt abandoned, not lived in. I called out, expecting an answer, but only my own voice echoed back. Each step forward made my chest tighter. The familiar space no longer felt safe. It felt neglected. Shadows stretched across the floor, and the stillness carried a weight I couldn't explain. Then I saw him. He was sitting where he always liked to rest, but the man in front of me barely resembled the one I knew. His body looked smaller, fragile, like time had taken more than it should have. His skin had lost its color, and his eyes struggled to stay open. I rushed toward him, dropping my bags without thinking. Nothing around him suggested care. The kitchen was empty. Bottle sat untouched. The room was cold enough that my hands shook, yet he had no blanket pulled close. I reached for his arm, and it felt far too light beneath my fingers. I called his name again, louder this time. His lips moved, slow and weak. It took a moment to understand the sound he made. He was trying to say my name. The word barely escaped him, like he wasn't sure I truly stood there. My heart broke in that instant. I knelt beside him, holding his hand, apologizing even though I didn't fully understand why yet. His grip was faint, but he squeezed once, as if confirming I was real. Tears blurred my vision as fear settled deep in my chest. That house, once filled with warmth and memories, had become a place of quiet suffering. And standing there, I knew whatever waited ahead would never be undone. Bright lights followed the rush through sliding doors. Machines beeped steadily while staff moved with urgent focus. I stood back, hands trembling, watching strangers work on someone I loved more than anything. Every second felt stretched, fragile, borrowed. Later, a physician pulled me aside. His expression was careful, practiced, but his eyes carried weight. He spoke slowly, choosing each phrase with care. What he told me settled deep and heavy inside my chest. Timing, he explained, had been everything. A few more hours would have meant a very different outcome. Chance, not planning, had kept him breathing. Those words echoed while I sat alone in the hallway. The truth landed quietly, without drama, yet it cut deeper than shouting ever could. Survival hadn't come from care or responsibility. It came from coincidence. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers. Notifications stacked across the screen, ignored earlier in the chaos. One voice message stood out. I pressed play without thinking. My father's tone was light, almost playful. Background noise drifted through the call, laughter, music, glasses clinking. He sounded rested, carefree, far away from worry. He wished me well, spoke about enjoying the season, and ended the message with ease, as if nothing else in the world required attention. There was no mention of concern. No hesitation. No awareness of the situation unfolding miles away. In that moment, clarity arrived without mercy. Every excuse, every reassurance, every delay snapped into focus. This wasn't confusion or poor judgment. It was a decision. Comfort had been prioritized. Freedom had been chosen. I sat there, phone resting in my palm, realizing the people meant to protect him had turned away willingly. They hadn't misunderstood responsibility. They had stepped over it. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with anger. It settled quietly, firmly, and permanently. From that point on, I knew exactly where their loyalty had been placed, and who had been left behind. Long before illness slowed him down, arrangements were made out of trust, not pressure. Walt believed in family duty. Years ago, when he was still strong enough to shovel his own driveway and fix things without help, he made a choice meant to secure his future. He put his home under my parents' names, convinced it would protect him later in life. That decision came from faith, not paperwork. He believed blood meant safety. He believed promises carried weight. They assured him he would always be looked after, that support wouldn't disappear when things became difficult. They spoke gently, confidently, like people who expected praise for saying the right things. For a long time it seemed fine. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Small needs were brushed aside, minor concerns delayed. Over time, attention faded quietly. Care turned into obligation, then annoyance. What once felt like responsibility slowly became something they wanted to avoid. Walt noticed the change, even if he never spoke about it directly. He stopped asking for help unless absolutely necessary. He adjusted his routines, lowered expectations, and made himself smaller in his own life. The house that was meant to protect him became a place he tried not to disturb. Their attitudes shifted too. Conversations shortened. Visits became rare. Any request was met with sighs or reminders of how busy they were. It was clear his presence complicated their plans. Comfort and freedom were calling louder than loyalty. What hurt most wasn't just neglect. It was the contrast. They benefited from what he had given them while slowly withdrawing what they had promised in return. Security was taken. Compassion was withheld. He had given them everything he could, believing it would guarantee care when his strength failed. Instead, he became something in their way. Not a parent. Not a responsibility. Just an obstacle delaying enjoyment. That history made the silence louder and the abandonment crueler. This wasn't sudden or accidental. It was built over years of choosing convenience over commitment. And by the time it mattered most, they had already decided what he was worth to them. Night settled gently around the room, broken only by the steady rhythm of machines nearby. The world outside felt distant, like it no longer belonged to us. I sat close, afraid that moving even an inch might steal what little time we had left. His hand rested in mine, thinner than I remembered, yet still warm. He looked at me for a long moment, eyes filled with something heavier than pain. His voice came out soft and strained, carrying shame that didn't belong to him. He told me he was sorry. Sorry for causing trouble. Sorry for needing help. Sorry for making life harder for others. Each word felt like a weight pressing against my chest. I squeezed his fingers and shook my head, fighting tears. I told him none of that was true. I reminded him of every sacrifice he had made, every moment he had shown up when no one else did. I told him love was never a burden. I said it firmly, hoping my certainty could replace the doubt he carried. He listened quietly, breathing slow and uneven. I leaned closer and promised things I didn't yet know how to fulfill. I said I would take care of what needed to be handled. I said I wouldn't let this end without meaning. Those promises weren't polished or planned. They came from instinct, from loyalty, from years of being protected by him. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. His grip tightened just slightly, enough to be felt. When he spoke again, his words were clear despite the weakness behind them. He didn't ask for justice or apologies. He didn't ask for explanations. He asked for memory. He wanted what happened to remain known, not hidden or softened. He wanted truth to stay intact. That was all. I nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, I understood what he was giving me. Not a task fueled by anger, but a responsibility rooted in honesty. As his hand relaxed in mine, I silently accepted it. That promise became something I would carry long after that room fell quiet. 3 days after the holiday ended, the room grew still in a way I hadn't felt before. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was final. Time didn't slow or soften the moment. It simply moved forward without him. I stayed longer than necessary, staring at an empty space, trying to memorize what was already gone. Arrangements followed quickly. Paperwork, calls, decisions made while feeling numb. I handled what needed handling because there was no one else I trusted to do it right. Grief didn't arrive loudly for me. It settled deep, steady, and sharp. They returned soon after. Their skin carried color from the sun, their posture relaxed, like people refreshed by distance. They spoke about delays and travel hassles, never about urgency. When they saw me, they hugged tightly, as if closeness could erase time. Their voices were heavy with practiced sadness. During the service, their sorrow filled the room. Tears flowed easily. Words of devotion were shared openly. Anyone watching would believe they had been deeply involved, deeply caring, deeply affected. They accepted comfort without hesitation, standing tall in their performance. I stood apart, quiet, observing. I noticed how easily they spoke about loss without mentioning absence. How naturally they accepted condolences meant for effort they never gave. The contrast was hard to miss, though few seemed to notice. They expected me to break. They assumed I would lean on them, overwhelmed and uncertain. They thought grief would leave me unfocused, grateful for guidance, willing to let things slide. They underestimated what those final days had done to me. While they mourned loudly, I thought carefully. While they sought reassurance, I reviewed facts. Every conversation, every choice, every missing step played back clearly in my mind. Emotion didn't cloud it. It sharpened it. Preparation doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it means waiting instead of reacting. I didn't confront them. I didn't accuse them. I let them believe the moment belonged to them. They mistook my calm for weakness. What they didn't see was resolve forming beneath it. Not driven by rage, but by promise. I wasn't there to argue history. I was there to make sure it wasn't rewritten. And I was ready to do exactly that. Sorting through his things became my quiet routine. I worked alone, moving slowly through drawers and boxes that hadn't been touched in years. Each item carried intention. Nothing was random. He had always been careful, thoughtful, even when his body weakened. That care showed itself again in what he left behind. Inside a small folder tucked beneath old manuals, I found envelopes neatly stacked. Dates were written in his handwriting. Some contained appointment summaries, others held printed instructions folded again and again. There were pharmacy slips showing delays, cancellations, missed refills. Each piece filled in gaps I hadn't fully understood before. More pages followed. Notes from professionals outlined concerns, risks, and clear recommendations. Requests for supervision. Warnings about isolation. Instructions meant to be followed without delay. These weren't vague suggestions. They were firm and urgent. Alongside them were messages addressed to my parents. Polite reminders. Follow-ups asking for confirmation. Attempts to schedule support. The responses, when present at all, were brief and dismissive. Promises pushed to later dates. Excuses framed as scheduling conflicts. Nothing suggested confusion. Everything suggested choice. The most painful discovery came last. A short note written by him, folded carefully. He explained that he kept records because he felt something was wrong. He didn't want conflict. He didn't want to accuse. He just wanted evidence in case the truth needed protection. Reading it made my hands shake. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't misunderstanding. Awareness had existed long before departure plans were made. Knowledge had been present. Responsibility had been acknowledged, then ignored. The pattern became impossible to deny. Timing aligned too perfectly. Silence followed warnings too closely. The absence of care wasn't sudden. It was scheduled. What they did required preparation. They knew his condition. They knew the risks. They chose distance anyway, arranging comfort for themselves while leaving him without support. The weight of that realization pressed hard. It removed doubt entirely. I wasn't dealing with carelessness. I was facing intention. Those documents didn't just explain what happened. They revealed motive. They showed that abandonment wasn't an accident caused by poor planning. It was a calculated decision wrapped in reassurance and hidden behind lies. I gathered everything carefully, returning each page to the folder. Not out of anger, but respect. He had prepared this truth quietly. Now it was my responsibility to make sure it mattered. I stayed calm, even when every instinct screamed at me to shout. I didn't storm into their home or demand explanations. I let the world move around me while I quietly took control. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was disciplined. I knew haste would ruin what needed to be done. First, I reached out to someone who understood the law, someone who could turn facts into protection. An attorney reviewed the files Grandpa had kept, cross-referenced dates, and explained the options I had. Every signature, every note, every receipt suddenly carried power I hadn't realized while grief blurred my vision. I organized every document, creating a clear timeline. Nothing was left to chance. I cataloged calls, letters, appointments, and warnings. Each piece became a brick in a foundation I could lean on, a structure that no excuse or lie could undermine. Precision mattered more than emotion in this moment. I made decisions slowly, deliberately, guided by what Grandpa had wanted. Every step was measured against his wishes. His instructions, his subtle advice in letters and notes, became my roadmap. I honored his intentions, ensuring nothing was misinterpreted or skipped. It wasn't about punishment yet, it was about integrity, about keeping his voice alive in the actions that followed. Patience weighed on me like a stone in my chest. Waiting, watching, planning, it was uncomfortable and frustrating. I wanted resolution immediately, wanted to see them face consequences for their choices. Yet I understood that rushing could undo everything. Restraint became my quiet weapon. And eventually, the effort began to show results. Choices I made, based on careful documentation and respect for Grandpa's instructions, started to shift the balance. What seemed impossible in the chaos of loss became achievable through calm persistence. Every patient decision strengthened my position, confirming that quiet resolve could outweigh reckless self-interest. As I reviewed the paperwork more closely, a detail caught my eye, something subtle, easily overlooked. The house, which my parents had assumed was fully theirs, wasn't entirely under their control. Years ago, Grandpa had added a legal clause that changed everything. It was small, hidden in the fine print, the kind of thing most people would skim and forget. That clause had one condition: neglect or abandonment could nullify any claim they had to the property. Suddenly, the pieces of the past weeks fell into place. Their trips, their excuses, their absence, it wasn't just careless. It was exactly the situation the clause had been written to address. I felt a strange mix of relief and vindication. All the careful record-keeping, every note Grandpa left, every step I had documented, it now had direct consequences. Their actions, which had caused so much pain, were no longer without repercussions. The law, guided by Grandpa's foresight, sided with me. I contacted the attorney again and went through the procedure step by step. Each document, each form, confirmed what I had feared and hoped in equal measure. Ownership shifted as quietly as it had been disputed. They had assumed possession, but their choices had undone their claim. When the final papers were signed and filed, the weight of that realization hit me fully. The home that had been a symbol of betrayal, of absence, of greed, was no longer theirs. Everything reverted to me, just as Grandpa had intended. I didn't celebrate loudly. There was no gloating, no confrontation. I simply stood with the knowledge that fairness, carefully applied, had been restored. What they overlooked, what they ignored, had become the very thing that ensured justice. The house was mine now, but more importantly, the balance of truth had been corrected. Once the house legally belonged to me, I acted deliberately. I arranged its sale, making sure the process was clean, transparent, and irreversible. Every step was guided by the principle of responsibility, not revenge. The money wasn't for me, it was a tool to restore what had been neglected. I used part of it to settle Grandpa's outstanding debts. Bills that had accumulated while others ignored their duty were finally cleared. Every payment felt like closing a circle that had been left open for far too long. The relief it brought wasn't personal satisfaction, it was fulfillment of a promise I had made to him years earlier. Another portion went to the hospice that had tried to intervene, offering support my parents refused. They had warned about his condition, attempted to provide assistance, and been dismissed. By donating, I ensured their efforts were recognized and put to good use, creating something positive from the pain caused by neglect. Meanwhile, my parents faced realities they hadn't anticipated. Their inheritance evaporated. Their reputation, carefully curated to appear loving and dutiful, crumbled under scrutiny. Control, the thing they valued above all, slipped entirely from their grasp. All their confidence and plans for comfort had no foundation. They came to me afterward, voices trembling, hands outstretched in pleas. Apologies flowed, excuses mounted, but I listened without comment. Their words were empty attempts to rewrite history. I didn't deny them, nor did I affirm them. Silence became my answer, a quiet acknowledgement that consequences had already arrived. The lesson was clear. Actions have weight. Choices cannot be hidden, and avoidance cannot erase responsibility. They discovered that truth, carefully documented and patiently executed, could not be outrun. And I, keeping my promise to Grandpa, let the consequences speak louder than anything I could have said. Every December, the house feels quieter than it used to, but in a way that brings comfort rather than emptiness. I light a single candle in the window, letting its glow reach beyond the walls, a small beacon for the memory of Walt. Its flame flickers gently, a reminder of the warmth he carried even in the coldest moments. I think of him often, not just for the guidance he gave me, but for the unwavering presence he offered when no one else did. His voice, his patience, his quiet strength, they echo in my decisions, in the way I face challenges, and in the way I protect what matters. Remembering him is not sorrowful, it's steadying. Peace came slowly. It wasn't immediate or effortless, but it grew as I honored every instruction, every hope, every lesson he left behind. I fulfilled the promises I made while sitting beside his hospital bed, and each action reinforced the bond that death could not sever. The contrast between their choices and mine is clear in my mind. They chased ease and indulgence, leaving duty behind, and the cost was greater than they anticipated. Their losses were tangible: inheritance, respect, control, but the deeper truth is that they sacrificed integrity and trust. I carry none of their regrets, only the certainty of what I did right. My life continues forward, shaped by love and memory rather than betrayal. Every year, the candle shines as a symbol of that truth, that loyalty, care, and action grounded in conscience endure far longer than selfishness ever could. And as its light dances across the room, I allow myself a small, steady smile. I did what was needed. I kept my word. And for Walt, that is enough. Hey besties! Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this emotional ride. Coming home to find my grandfather neglected while my parents enjoyed a cruise broke me, but it also showed me the truth about loyalty and betrayal. I honored his wishes, uncovered the lies, and restored what was lost. Sometimes, facing pain reveals strength we didn't know existed. If this touched you, like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.